is with this new series, Ratched.
I watched about half of that and I stopped. I was really into it for some reason, and then I woke up from that haze and I was like, that's not a very good show. I don't know why. in my opinion.
It's not. It's not. I watched the first episode and I thought, okay, well, let's see where this goes. I wasn't completely taken by, but I thought it looks interesting. And so the second episode, I think I watched, and I didn't even finish watching it actually, maybe 30 minutes of it or something. And I thought this is just I don't know what you thought, but for me, it was like a very badly done American Horror Story Asylum. Like he took out some sort of stuff that ended up on a cutting floor or something, so let's just throw it in there. It was a weak show, but that's another example of
it is from the same creator, so that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. But I still think it could have been a little bit. It was just a shock after shock. None of it made sense, and I think for me, a lot of reviews actually said this. They said, is Nurse Ratched supposed to be a repressed lesbian or something else or whatever? It's just the only thing that's connected to Nurse Ratched is her name, but nothing really else. It really is a different character.
I didn't see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Well, I didn't read the book, and I'm a Philistine in that way, but I don't really remember too much of the movie. But she doesn't strike me as anyone who was ever in her younger life very fashionable or like some kind of high executive function, like she should be working in advertising in Manhattan or something, right? Like that's how Sarah Paulson comes across in this.
Right.
Yeah. It turns out she's a repressed lesbian with some surprisingly humane views in her own twisted way, right? Like she does. I watched more episodes than you, but some of the practices of the doctor she thought were just barbaric, and she was working to subvert it, make sure it didn't happen. And but then the doctor also said he was against the death penalty. But it's
okay, all right.
Yeah. So and then the nurses working there are like, the show is really sort of tawdry in a really transparent way too.
Yeah. It was almost like a B movie in a way. Yeah, I know what you mean, and I guess take it for what it is. But when you are saying we want to know what happened to Nurse Ratched, who is she? And then anybody who has either seen the film or read the book, you kind of go, wait, this is really not. It's really not. It doesn't really tell us anything about how Nurse Ratched became Nurse Ratched, because in the film, I haven't read the book. I've seen the film. In the film, she's really kind of like this bureaucrat, a jaded bureaucrat who has completely dehumanized her patients, who is not some sadist in the sense that she wants to give everybody lobotomies or, you know what I mean? It's just a very clinical.
I don't remember her in the movie thinking like 20 steps ahead, as if she's got some kind of crazy long-term agenda to take over the hospital and to build her own psychiatric empire or something. That's how it seems in the show. But I don't see her having any plans that ambitious in the movie. But
no, not at all. I think that she's kind of set. She's set in her role. In many ways, I think she's imprisoned in there as well, of her own prison, in the film.
Maybe that's what happened sometime in between the late 40s when the show takes place in the it would be the movie, which came out in 1975, was based on a book which was more like the 60s. So
I think
the movie is approximately 20 years later, maybe even 15 to 20, not 30. So sometime in between the period in the show, the period depicted in the show, and then in the movie, she became much less ambitious, less fashionable, just sort of settled into a kind of coldly indifferent bureaucratic nurse type of thing. I don't know.
I guess so. But I think that's what you would think, right? And but I think the overly stylized series, overly stylized photograph of the episodes is actually a distraction in this case, because you're just going, wow, everybody's so rich. They all look like advertisements for, Cadillacs or something. And
that's what's interesting. The office for the guy who ran the hospital is gorgeous and huge. It's
That's right.
like it looks like Lee Iacocca's office, the General Motors guy from 70s.
Yeah.
Like a psychiatric hospital that people would rather pretend doesn't exist is that palatial and gorgeous. A little,
Right.
it
It
is
looked too
realized.
brand new. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it actually does
Yeah.
make sense that things like that were being built then, right?
That's true. Yes.
They weren't
Yes.
new. So, but still, his office looked a little too grand, even for being new. Just given the
Right.
kind of
Right.
place that it is, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand. I mean, that's what he has done the same thing in, not so much in Asylum, but in Coven. And, he obviously, I've watched some of the American Horror Story series, and he's interested in that sort of stylized way of photographing. And I like it. I mean, it's interesting, but
it's interesting.
This one,
Yeah, the Asylum one, didn't that have James Cromwell, who has since passed? They say it's an anthology, so like you can start any given season.
right.
But I started watching the one that's Apocalypse, American Horror Story Apocalypse, and it takes place in this kind of apocalyptic aftermath world. In the first episode, I was drawn in, and then like 3 or 4 episodes in, it's suddenly back in like some big LA house with the same characters from all the other American Horror Stories. So it's like, it does feel like you needed to have seen the other seasons to understand what that was about.
Yeah, I've watched the first one. What else? Asylum, Coven. And I don't know if there was anything else. I think I stopped at that point. There was actually a lot of the stuff that was, as I was watching it, I realized it's so deviant and so dysfunctional that after a while you kind of feel like it's just sort of staining you. You know what I mean? Aesthetically, almost like you're just going, what is the point of this? I'm just watching someone else's dysfunction. There's really no, almost like a voyeur, like it didn't make any sense to continue to watch it. And I guess Ratched feels a little bit like that without much plot or weird plot. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I got halfway through and stopped, and you only got a couple episodes in. It's more, I'd rather talk about things that are sort of adjacent to it. Yeah, like the actors and other things they've been in, rather than talk about how great the show is on its own terms or according to its own logic, because I don't think it is that good. But did you notice it's a Netflix show, but it's got FX channel written all over. It's got a lot of the same actors. So the guy who ran the hospital, Ratched, he was in American Crime Story, Versace.
Okay.
Which is another. I don't know what's going on. So it looks like the FX channel has a series of American fill-in-the-blank stories. So there's American Horror Story, American Crime Story, and a lot of the actors, they move from one to the other.
I see.
So I noticed that. Yeah, so that act, I don't know his name, but he's not that great in Ratched, but he is actually a pretty good actor, and I would recommend him in the American Crime Story Versace, which is about the murder of Giovanni Versace in Miami in the 90s, like late 90s at some point.
Was it in the 90s? Or was it? Oh, okay, that long ago. Wow.
Not a bit though. I think so. Like 98 maybe, 97, 98.
Maybe something like that. Yeah, no, I mean, I like visually beautiful things too. Obviously, but when it starts to feel like a gimmick, which to me in Red did, no amount of good acting can save it. It was sort of, the first episode, I believe, even borrowed from Bernard Herrmann's score in Vertigo, and I think it borrowed some of that, and there was some lights, changing of the lights as she walking through the hallway, which were reminiscent of Vertigo. But
the music from Kate Fear. The theme song from Kate Fear kept showing up on that.
Okay, all right. I didn't. Okay.
I know that there were Kate Fear, but. Yeah, maybe we're talking about the same music. Maybe the music from Vertigo was also used in Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear, which is also being used again in Ratched.
Maybe. Maybe
But
it's
yeah,
one of those recognizable scores. He made it obviously specifically for Vertigo, but it just becomes a gimmick. It becomes sort of is there a it, it's not a continuity. There is no cinematic continuity, and nothing is talking to anything. Do you see what I mean? I don't know if you felt that way, but it was sort
yeah,
of, let's just throw in a corpse here and a corpse there, and it ends up looking like a B movie. And I guess if that's the level you want to think about it, then that's fine. But I don't think that Netflix is trying to present it as a B movie. So I don't know, in my
yeah. No,
opinion, I don't know.
it has a bigger budget than a B movie, and that's why that's why I hung on as long as I did, because it does look very good.
Right.
And like a lot of the technical aspects are like just great. The great editing,
I agree.
great. There's I mean the California coast, gorgeous. The Bixby Bridge near Monterey is featured in that. That it's nice to look at, but it's just not that great.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was reading reviews of it, actually. I rarely read the reviews, but pretty much most people said that it's nice to look at, but there's no story really. And I think actually it was kind of heartening for me to hear the reviews, to read the reviews, because everybody was looking for a more depth in it, which I'm glad to see. It means culture is not dead yet,
Even if there's like kind of a long-term decline in quality, you can jump forward in time to a period where it's declined even further so fast that people recognize, okay, well, maybe we're all gradually enjoying declining quality TV and film, but this is too much too fast, in other words.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think because you don't have a choice, I mean, you're um, unless perhaps maybe some European productions are a little bit better, but you are watching what's out there, and like you said, actually, you start to not even see the difference, but you kind of know it, that something in the past was better, that there was a little bit more care with it. Like I always think about those productions of mystery shows, the British mystery shows like Inspector Morse or Sherlock Holmes, with Jeremy Brett. And they're not very stylized, right? There's really not a lot of emphasis put on perfect production, but they're very deep. And then I think as the years were progressing, people put more emphasis on style than on the content ultimately.
Yeah, I wonder. These mystery shows you mentioned, it seems to me like there are so many of them like made in the 80s and 90s, and I'm trying to think, was it not stylized? I'm thinking compared to what? But then when I compare it to say Murder, She Wrote from the 80s, Murder, She Wrote does actually seem more stylized than the British stuff. I mean, say what you will, but it actually is. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, so Downton Abbey is sort of what maybe those shows would have looked like if they'd been more stylized.
Right,
but
right.
I don't know. It's hard to say.
And they're more tight. I mean, I have to say, they are definitely more. If you're speaking aesthetically, they're definitely more tight shows today. But I think that they always somehow throw in some kind of ideology in it, and it's precisely because of that I certainly lose interest. As soon as that comes up, I just go, okay, there's no human story here. I'm not interested, and it just loses it for me. It really does. I can't. And to tie it back to Cuties, I really do think, like you said, this is what people reacted to in many ways. That they're just so sick and tired of being, having this thrown at them, which is a rightful anger, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's I listened to the Red Scare podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Oh, I haven't.
I was going to say they're in your neighborhood. Well, yeah, I mean, it's Anna Kachian and Dasha something. They're like part of the anti-woke left, and their profiles are kind of coming up in the year or so. They're sort of like New York City socialites, literary types, but pushing against the progressivism in their midst to a
I
large degree.
see.
I know you're in Buffalo, they're in New York City, but from my perspective, that's your neighborhood. Yeah, but anyway, so they're talking about cuties as well, and they said they made the point that in France, this gets back to a long-standing difference between America's sort of cultural profile and France's cultural profile, and they just don't find sexualization of youth as alarming. They just have a higher bar to calling it like exploitation and just wrong, full stop. So that's also coming into play here in the controversy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, different perspectives.
Yeah, and they said the movie actually has a somewhat conservative message, and maybe you made that point as well, where the more conservative traditions that she came from end up looking somewhat better than the consumerist, liberal, libertine lifestyle that the West is sort of trying to cram down everyone's throat. I don't know, though.
No, but even actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because even actually I didn't mention this in my review, it would be too much, but even within her own particular African Muslim tradition, she shows different sides of Islam within that as well. You have this really oppressive Islam where, her father's coming back from Senegal with another wife. So now he's going to have two wives, right? And then you have a scene where Imam is talking with her, and her mother basically said, "Can you check her out? I think she's possessed by demons or something like that." And he looks at her and he says, "Please stop this." He said, "There are no demons here." And then he tells her, "You have a right to leave your husband. You are not, you're not obligated to do this." He's telling her this, right? So there are even different facets of Islam that she's showing, which I think people missed out on some of it, but she definitely criticizes the sort of libertine French culture. Absolutely. This is a negative thing for her completely.
Yeah. And the Red Scare podcast, given that they are they're the anti-woke left, which is a more old school Marxist anti-capitalist left. It's also called the materialist left. And they made the point that a lot of American conservatives who are upset about this seem completely uninterested in the capitalist-driven social media technology that's bringing it to everyone, right? It's thought of as sort of a politically neutral technology that's not particularly interesting to anybody, but it actually is what we're all living under, and it's a hard thing to pin down and get anyone to really care about. It's a very kind of high concerns about sort of surveillance capitalism, as the left would call it, or just social media's effect on youth is better, way the right would rather frame it. There's kind of a high level place where like the almost reactionary traditionalist meets the big picture Marxist continental philosopher, but they're critical of that the alienation and the deracinated culture that creates. But we get bogged down in the day-to-day controversies about cuties, or something else. So it's hard for everyone to come together and call that part of it out. Meaning conservatives couldn't be that upset about cuties if there wasn't a way for cuties to be delivered to their lives, right? And that is driven by trends in techno-commercialism.
Right.
So there's a...
it's a new problem, right? It really is, actually, and I think that's where you really don't have a precedent for it. But I do think that again, the movie was a way to just scream and yell and what have you. But I think you're right. I think there's a bigger problem here of let's say of TikTok. I mean, I'm not there, but I've heard that teens or tweens put up all kinds of things there, which was a point of the film. And then, but how do you? It's a much bigger fight to go after the source than after the movie, right? So, and it's really not a fight. You're just kind of talking on Twitter and what have you, so.
Right. So in a sense, trying to prevent TikTok from operating in the U.S. Is getting at the source of the problem in a way that conservatives should appreciate. But some of them think, well, it's attacking capitalism. Well, you don't want, you can't have even though the whole movie Cuties can't be reduced to that one scene. But you can't have a scene like that. You can't have your daughters trying to emulate that if they don't have this product, this capitalist delivered product called TikTok, right?
Right.
So instead of being concerned about a particular thing that is showing up on TikTok, be concerned about that technology and that type of product itself, period. So I think some conservatives see the bigger picture, but it leads them somewhat in an anti-capitalist direction. But American conservatives are so wedded to capitalism that it creates tension that they'd rather not face, you know?
I think so. I think there's probably a little bit of that. And that's exactly, the point of you're stuck in this one particular ideological framework and you don't want to get out of it. But I think the one thing to do is to maintain your principles while you're reacting to the changing culture, that's surrounding you. And one thing that the Social Dilemma didn't really say, and I don't think they believe that, is that there is such thing as free will. We can choose not to use these platforms. And as much as these platforms are encouraging bad behavior, clearly, it is always up to the person to choose to be a moral person. Because if you know it, I mean, it's almost like Twitter is almost like all's fair on Twitter, right? And all's fair in love war in Twitter. So there's really no morality whatsoever. But it's not like that, people should, think before they tweet. And it's a sort of a wild balance, right? So
I would be a little more on the side that blames the companies and not free will. A little in the sense that, so think of the phenomenon of Twitter pile-ons, right? You experienced some of it yourself, right? So everyone's attacking this person on Twitter. From any one person's perspective, all they did was send off one little critical sentence, and then they went on with their day. So it doesn't feel to them like they're behaving immorally, and that's because the technology has made their particular input so small as to be not very compelling to their psychology. It doesn't feel like they did anything wrong, and that is a manifestation of the techno-commercial environment they're operating in. So it's hard to blame them for a certain moral failing or character flaw when Twitter has made it so easy to contribute to a negative,
Oh,
in a way
I see what you mean.
Like, yeah, if you run across the street and knock an old lady down, right away that you fucked up, you did bad, But on Twitter, I'm not comparing you knocking an old lady down to one critical comment on Twitter. Anything is worse, but the point is that a lot of the environment that we're living in now, it doesn't mesh well with our own ability to correct an instance of a character flaw or a morality fail. It's harder.
Right. I mean, it's definitely it brings out the worst in people, obviously, and I try to maintain.
Yeah.
The way I'm trying to maintain it personally is to really, once I recognize that somebody is interested only in fighting, I step out immediately. I don't even go there. So, and I'm not like hopeless about humanity, but at the same time, I'm trying to also, I want social media to not have a negative impact on me, whatever that means. So I have to make sure that I'm using it in a way that benefits me, but not that takes away from me. Do you know what I mean? And I think everybody can do that in that sense. But you're absolutely right. I think that these things are thrown at you, and a lot of the times they've created a catch-22, social media platforms, because you want to complain about them, but in order to complain about them, you have to get on that platform. And then you're stuck in that framework, there's in that mad loop. And then if you don't get on it, do you really have a voice? So it's such a mess. It really is.
Yeah. And I think the longstanding conservative tradition of focusing on individual effort, individual morality, I think that it's not a good solution to the problems that we're facing now. They're coming from external sources and in such an omnipresent way that that kind of attitude, I think, needs to be updated. It doesn't have to make you a Marxist, or it wouldn't make you identity politics. That's something else. But you don't have to be like a full blown. There's no free will. Individual effort doesn't matter. We're all just at the whim of social forces. You don't have to go full on that way, but you do have to recognize just how the world is changing, and much of what consumerism means now is a constant background condition from these tech overlords who exist in the ether. It's not like just going down to a liquor store or not, or going to a strip club or not. Different sort of vices are presenting themselves now. You know what I mean?
Right. Right, absolutely. And there's more and more kind of disembodied experience precisely because everything's virtual. So it makes it almost
Yeah.
easier to not be good. And so
Yeah. Well, it's been about an hour. I guess that's a good place to leave it.
yeah.
Yeah. Good conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me and to do this.